This is preparation for you to take care of your sister's unborn child, my mother said unapologetically, as if it were her rightful claim. In front of me was the living room, which should have been my castle, transformed into a pitiful child's room. The wallpaper had been stripped away and replaced with a jarring animal pattern in bright, painful colors instead of the soft cream it used to be. The floor was covered with thick mats to prevent injuries, and in one corner sat a baby crib that still hadn't been unpacked. My father, who seemed pleased with himself, crossed his arms and said, "Well, surprised? We managed to get this ready before you came home." Surprised? That was far too mild a word to describe my feelings. A boiling mix of anger and despair at being betrayed churned in my stomach. My name is Sarah. I had just returned to my home country a few hours ago after a year of volunteer work abroad. I purchased this little house with funds I had saved up during my student days. It was my first and biggest purchase in life and a symbol of my independence. I was excited for the new life that was about to begin. I would use the experiences I gained over the years to build a new career. This house was supposed to be the foundation for it, but my real parents and sister had trampled on my castle, painting it without my permission. My sister Kelly had always been that way. She couldn't be satisfied unless she got everything she wanted without caring about how it affected others. And my parents had always pampered and condoned Kelly's behavior. If she went off track, it was never her fault. They always blamed it on someone else or her circumstances, cleaning up after her. While I was abroad, I had heard that Kelly was pregnant. The man had disappeared early on, and in the end, my parents were taking care of everything. However, I never imagined that the consequences would reach me so far across the ocean. When I returned to my house after a year, I was welcomed by my parents who looked proud and my sister Kelly lounging on the sofa, rubbing her swollen belly. Then I was hit with the words I shared earlier. "Can you explain what this is all about?" The voice I squeezed out from my throat sounded surprisingly cold, even to myself. My mother frowned as if she was displeased with my attitude. "It means exactly what it says. Kelly is going to be a mother soon. You're single and looking for a job, right? You should have plenty of time. Since we're family, it's only natural to help each other out. Helping each other and illegally renovating my house are two different things. Trying to take over my life is completely different." My mother's face showed sheer exasperation at my rebuttal, and she let out a sigh. "You really lack charm, don't you? Especially when Kelly is going through such a tough time. Can't you at least make some effort for your family?" I am about to start a job utilizing my overseas experience. I've been steadily preparing for this locally. My plan, my life, my future. All of these have been dismissed as worthless by these people with just a phrase, "You're single and have time." This house is mine. They disregard my ownership, illegally enter using a spare key, and renovate the house without my permission. They don't understand how abnormal that is. No, they don't even try to understand. Kelly then laughed and cheerfully said, "When I heard that you were coming back, I thought it was perfect. I can save money by not hiring a babysitter, so it's killing two birds with one stone, right?" Those words, spoken by a seemingly innocent and pure exploiter, snapped something inside me. I turned on my heel and headed toward the entrance. "Where are you going?" My mother's hysterical voice pierced my back, but I ignored it. I opened the door and glanced back just once. I saw Kelly looking dumbfounded on the couch and my parents glaring at me with their brows furrowed. "What you are doing is a crime." Having said just that, I closed the door. Fortunately, my suitcase was still at the entrance. I dragged it out and dashed into the night streets. The cold air slightly cooled the raging anger inside me. I immediately hailed a taxi and headed over to the house of my partner, Ben, who had been my emotional support over the past year. As soon as I opened his door, I collapsed in tears right there. He said nothing, simply rubbing my back in silence. I wonder if he did that for over an hour until my tears dried up. Finally, having regained a little composure, I told him everything that had happened. Ben works at a law firm. He is an intelligent person who always makes calm judgments. After quietly listening to my story, he held my hand and said in a clear tone, "Sarah, you haven't done anything wrong. What they are doing is an unforgivable invasion of rights under the pretext of family. I fully support your decision to take legal action." That night, Ben arranged for me to stay in the guest room, but I couldn't sleep at all. Staring at the darkness of the ceiling, various memories flooded over me. Why did I make the big decision to buy a house at such a young age? It was because I needed to distance myself physically from my family home. Kelly had always wanted everything that was mine. As a child, it was toys and clothes. During my school days, she even tried to get her hands on my friends. Each time, my parents would invariably lecture me. "You're the older sister, so you should be patient. Kelly is still a child." Kelly's selfishness was a monster nurtured by my parents' overprotectiveness. Even when I said I was going to do overseas volunteer work, my parents vehemently opposed it. It's dangerous for a girl to go overseas alone. While they pretended to care about my well-being with their words, their true feelings oozed out from every corner of their speech. "And what will happen to Kelly if you're gone? If something happens, you won't be able to be there for her." Looking back, it was clear that it wasn't a concern at all. Their real worry was simply that I would go somewhere beyond their control and no longer be available as a convenient tool for Kelly. For them, I was always meant to be a supporting character for Kelly and a safety net for when things went wrong. My life, my dreams, were always secondary. This is why I needed to build my own castle to escape from their grip. Then, a week before my departure, that dreadful battle over the spare key unfolded. My parents arrived unannounced while I was unpacking at my new home. "What's going to happen to the house while you're away?" My mother said that as she surveyed the room as if it were her own home. A house deteriorates quickly if no one lives in it and the air isn't changed. Mold can grow on the walls from humidity, and the pipes can rust. My father chimed in. "And it's for emergencies. What if mail piles up? What if something happens? We'll check in on it from time to time, so just give us one key." I felt a strong sense of caution inside. "In case something happens" was a magic phrase that had always been used to suit my sister's convenience. If I handed them the key, my privacy would be violated for sure. They might rummage through my room while I was away, or in the worst-case scenario, even bring in my sister's belongings. "That's not a concern," I firmly declined. "I'll set up mail forwarding and have my friend Patty and a professional management company take care of the house, so it's all fine." That answer seemed to touch a nerve with them. "Well, it seems we aren't that trustworthy." My mother sighed dramatically, pressing a handkerchief to her eyes as if she were a tragic heroine. "Although we're your real parents, friends and others are more important to you, even though we're worrying so much about you." My father, hardly hiding his irritation, said, "Why can't you accept your parents' goodwill openly?" It was the usual pattern. When I responded with reason, they twisted it into an emotional argument, trying to instill guilt in me. During the busy time before my departure, I didn't want to continue pointless arguments with them, which would wear down my mind any further. I took a deep, deep breath and pulled a spare key from the drawer. "Fine, I'll leave this with you. But promise me, only in truly, truly emergency situations, and absolutely do not enter the house without my permission." I now know that this insistence was completely meaningless. At that time, in my desperate desire to escape their control, I traded a momentary peace for a single key. That moment of compromise led to this worst-case scenario. A year of volunteer work changed me. Even in poor conditions, people respected and supported each other, and above all, they lived standing on their own feet. There, I learned the true meanings of independence and dignity. The right to live as a human being, not as someone's possession. I felt the importance of that in my bones. That's why I couldn't forgive them. They trampled over my home, the symbol of my dignity, with their shoes. They tried to lock me back in the cage of "for Kelly." As dawn broke, my heart was set. The phrase, "because we're family," was not a license to act without consequence. Rather, because we are family, there is a line that must not be crossed. I must fight to protect my life. Dawn came. Even though I shouldn't have been able to sleep, my mind was surprisingly clear. When I went to the living room, Ben was already brewing coffee and waiting for me. "You probably didn't sleep well. It's understandable," he said while placing a note on the table. It simply outlined the actions I needed to take. First, prepare your home's registration documents and, if possible, photos of the room before any renovations. Then report it to the police, informing them that someone has entered your home and made changes without your permission as the owner. When the police arrive, prove your ownership and request a site inspection. There's no need to get emotional. Just convey the facts calmly. The note also listed legal keywords like trespassing and property damage. They will use the word family as a shield. However, under the law, everyone is equal. The fact that you are the owner will be your strongest weapon. Don't forget that. Ben's calm words invigorated my heart. I was not alone. Just thinking that made me feel empowered. I prepared myself and pressed the call button on my smartphone. The electronic sound coming from the speaker resonated in my ears like a gong announcing the start of a battle. 911, what is your emergency? For a moment, I was at a loss for words at the calm voice of the operator. I was about to confront my family, and I could not falter then. I took a deep breath and spoke clearly. There has been an incident. My house has been illegally trespassed and my belongings have been damaged. The culprits are my parents and my younger sister. When asked if my life was in danger, I informed them that I was not, and I was then directed to redial a non-emergency number. After explaining the situation again, the police agreed to come. A few hours after the report, the intercom at Ben's house rang. When I opened the door, 2 police officers in uniform were standing there. One was an older, calm-looking officer, and the other was a younger, earnest-looking officer. We sat facing each other at the living room table. With Ben's support, I explained everything that had happened so far. I presented the property registration certificate and photos of the room saved on my smartphone before the renovations, as evidence. The photos were casually taken right before my departure for volunteering to record the arrangement of the furniture, but now they were about to become decisive evidence. The older police officer listened to my story in silence, glanced over the evidence documents, and nodded quietly. I see. I understand the situation. This may indeed be not something that can be handled simply as a family dispute. Since the current state of the house has been changed against your clear will as the owner, we need to conduct an investigation. Could you guide us to your residence? Upon hearing those words, I recognized the seriousness of the matter once again. There was no turning back. A police car followed behind the car that Ben was driving. The familiar way home felt heavy, as if it were a path leading to the execution site. Is this really the right thing to do? For a moment, my heart wavered. However, the face reflected in the rearview mirror was strangely resolute. I stood in front of my house's entrance once again, alongside the police officer. It was the place I had dashed out from in despair the previous day. But now I was not alone. There was a powerful ally beside me, an enforcer of the law. When I rang the doorbell, my father opened the door with an irritated expression. Upon noticing the police officer standing behind me, his face changed to one of surprise and confusion. What is this? What's going on? I have come to file a police report regarding an illegal entry and property damage. At my calm words, my mother, who had come out from the living room, raised her voice in a high pitch. A police report? What are you talking about? Why are you bringing the police right after yesterday? The older police officer began explaining to my parents in a calm voice. This is indeed the property owned by Sarah, correct? I have been informed that you entered without permission using a spare key and made alterations to the interior without consent. My father, despite being flustered, raised his voice. We are family. What kind of permission is needed to enter my daughter's house? Besides, that spare key was handed over by her voluntarily. My father completely disregarded the circumstances under which he persuaded me to give the key, almost as if I had willingly offered it out of pure goodwill. How much I resisted back then. How firmly I had insisted. It was a memory that had conveniently been erased from his mind. Glaring at that distorted truth, I felt my anger evolving into pity. My mother continued in a tone reminiscent of a plea. Officer, she's just a little tired. She's been overseas for a year and is a bit on edge. We as her parents simply wanted to help. Why does it have to involve the police? Kelly, as if waiting for the right moment, appeared at the entrance of the living room, rubbing her belly, looking like a tragic heroine. Sarah, what's going on? If you do something like this, it will affect the baby. I can't believe you're selling the family to the police. Their arguments were all based on emotion, constantly revolving around, because we're family, because it's parental love, and because we care about you. They believed without a doubt that before those universal words, the law and individual rights became powerless. However, that illusion was ruthlessly shattered by the next words of the older police officer. I understand your feelings, but the law is a different matter. Even if you had a spare key, it doesn't mean that you were given free access to the house. If you entered the property without the clear permission of the owner, Sarah, and caused damage to the property, you could be violating the law. This is, before being a family issue, a legal issue. I could see my father's face turning red with anger. He probably could not accept that their justice had been denied by societal rules. Don't mess with us. Are you trying to treat us like criminals? What's so terrible about changing the wallpaper a little? It's your fault, Sarah, for saying unnecessary things. My enraged father tried to grab at me. At that moment, the young police officer quickly stepped in and held my father's arm. Sir, please calm down. Any further action may be considered obstruction of justice. Seeing my father being restrained, my mother seemed to change her strategy. She collapsed in tears, saying, "No, don't do this," and began to loudly lament how she couldn't face the neighbors. It was an obvious act to draw sympathy from those around her. Kelly spat out, "I don't care anymore," and disappeared deeper into the living room. It was a hellish scene, but my heart was oddly calm. This was the reality they had chosen. The sight of my family exposing their disgrace and screaming in anger erased even the last remnants of emotion I had left. I turned to the older police officer and clearly stated my intent. As the owner, I officially report the damage. I demand that this house be restored to its original state. If that is not possible, I will seek proper compensation for the damages. That moment was when I was completely liberated from the curse known as family. In front of my resolute attitude, the police mechanically proceeded with their procedures. On-site investigations were conducted, and numerous photos of the transformed living room were taken. My parents were to be voluntarily questioned. In the meantime, I contacted Ben to report the situation. "Well done, Sarah. You've overcome the toughest hurdle, but the real battle is just beginning." Ben was right. With the police's involvement, they were forced to understand, whether they liked it or not, that their actions were legally impermissible. However, that did not mean they genuinely felt remorse. Rather, their struggle was morphing into something even more insidious from this point onward. That night, my smartphone began to ring incessantly. The callers were my aunts, uncles, and cousins. Relatives who typically only contacted each other during weddings and funerals began to reach out. The call from Aunt Doris set it all off. "Sarah, I've heard. Your mother's crying. You've changed since you went overseas. People who don't value family can't find happiness anywhere." It was a one-sided imposition of outdated values. I said nothing and simply hung up the call quietly. But the attacks didn't end there. The next call came from my maternal grandmother, who had doted on me so much when I was a child. "Sarah," her voice was hoarse and frail, "I heard from your mother. There was no need to call the police. Your parents were just worried about your sister. Please don't make this a bigger issue than it needs to be. I'm asking you from the bottom of my heart." It was the worst kind of peer pressure disguised as goodwill. Guilt was being drilled into me, playing on my conscience about not wanting to upset my grandmother. I bit my lip. "Grandma, I'm sorry, but this is something I have to decide for myself." I had no choice but to hang up after saying that. I felt as if a cold droplet was falling in my heart. It was evident that my mother was making calls to all our relatives, spinning a web of lies as if they were the victims. She claimed that I had returned from overseas infected with strange ideas, bullied poor Kelly, and ultimately turned my benevolent parents into the police. That was probably the storyline. They aimed to isolate me by portraying me as an ungrateful madwoman and surrounding me with pressure from all sides to force me to withdraw my demands. The next call was from my father. However, his tone was eerily calm, unlike the angry shouts from yesterday. "Sarah, I understand your feelings. We may have gone a bit too far. I apologize." I was momentarily taken aback by the sudden apology, but upon hearing his next words, I realized it was merely his new negotiation tactic. "But you need to face reality a little. How much do you think it costs to restore the wallpaper? We can't just procure that kind of money immediately. Instead, why don't we talk about something more constructive? For example, we could let Kelly and the others use the room as it is. In return, we would pay you a certain amount each month as rent. How about that? It's not a bad deal, right?" I was genuinely astounded. Rent? What meaning is there in a promise made merely with words? Until now, though they often begged for money, I had never been repaid as promised. They would find some excuse to delay the payments, and in a few months it was obvious they would angrily retort, "We're family, so don't complain about the rent." Yet even if they did pay the rent as promised, the essence of the issue was not there. He still did not understand that their actions constituted a crime. This was not just about rent or contracts, it was a matter of the soul, of having trust and dignity trampled upon. Rent? Are you kidding me? I said coldly. This isn't even the kind of issue we're discussing. Besides, I can hardly believe that you would pay as promised. But that doesn't matter anymore. You committed a crime. As long as you lack that awareness, you can't even come to the negotiation table. Restoring the house to its original state is the minimum responsibility you must fulfill. My father's tone of voice was gradually tinged with irritation. Why are you repaying our kindness with this kind betrayal? It's too much, isn't it? Who do you think put you through university? Who took care of this house while you were off volunteering? You should be grateful instead of calling the police. Gratitude? Don't confuse control with management. This is the house I bought with my own money. It doesn't belong to you. It's a parent's duty to raise their children, and if you boast about that as a favor, you are unfit as parents. I have nothing more to say. From now on, please communicate through my lawyer. A lawyer? Are you really going that far against your family? Yes, I will. I realized that you see me not as family, but merely as a tool for your own convenience. I ended the call before my father could shout anything back. My hand was sweating as I gripped the smartphone. My heart was beating fiercely. Yet strangely, I did not feel fear. Instead, I sensed a quiet determination rising from the depths of my abdomen. I couldn't back down there. It was a battle for me to reclaim control over my own life. Negotiations continued for several days. My parents tried various tactics to persuade me. They demanded a reduction, proposed installment payments, or even spread lies about Kelly supposedly collapsing from emotional shock, trying to instill guilt in me. I followed Ben's advice and refused any direct communication. I notified them that all demands should go through the lawyer I had engaged. This became the decisive blow. With the arrival of an agent called the Law, which rendered their emotional arguments useless, my parents finally seemed to give in. A few days later, I received word from my lawyer. Your parents have agreed to pay the restoration costs in full. Ironically, most of that amount had originally been their savings for retirement, which was supposed to fund Kelly's childbirth expenses and subsequent living support. Because of their foolish actions, they ended up carving away at the future of their most beloved daughter with their own hands. After the payment of expenses was confirmed, I arranged for the contractor and began the renovation of the house. The wallpaper returned to the calm cream color that I had chosen, the floor mat was peeled up, and the brand new crib was taken away by the contractor without ever being used. As I smelled the paint lingering in the living room, I realized that the long battle I had fought was finally over. My castle had finally regained its original rightful form. On the day the house was completely cleaned up, I stood alone in the middle of the empty living room. The setting sun streamed through the window, warmly illuminating the room. Here, I would begin my new life. A life that would not be disturbed by anyone nor exploited by anyone, just my own. I took out my smartphone and deleted all the contacts of my parents, Kelly, and the relatives who had accused me. There was no longer any need for my heart to be disturbed by their voices. I had cut ties with my past. Just then, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, there stood Ben with the bouquet in his arms. Congratulations, Sarah. I came to celebrate your new beginning. Seeing his gentle smile, a tear fell from my eye. It was not a tear of sadness or anger. It was a tear of hope. A tear that came after overcoming everything and taking a new step forward. A year has passed since then. The house that was once my castle has now become a true home, filled with warm light and a gentle atmosphere. The traces of that dreaded animal-patterned wallpaper are nowhere to be found, and on the cream-colored walls there are photos of smiling children I took while volunteering. Ben visits on weekends, and we enjoy a modest dinner together. I never imagined that such mundane daily life could be so precious. I am now starting a new career in an international NPO. It is a fulfilling job where I can make the most of my experience abroad. I am planning educational support programs for children in refugee camps, flying around the world every day. Recently, I received a video letter from the children in the areas we support. Watching their faces smile and say, "Thank you, Sarah," in halting words, I truly felt glad I chose this job. Not to be someone's sacrifice, but to build a future hand in hand with someone else. That is what I really wanted to do. On the other hand, my family, who never tried to understand my choices until the end, seemed to be reaping what they had sowed. It seems that Kelly has safely given birth. I learned this through a distant relative who managed to bypass my block and sent me a direct message on social media. The message included a photo of the newborn baby along with the unnecessary comment, "Kelly seems to be struggling alone. Why not send her a congratulatory gift?" I read the message and deleted it without replying. From another relative, I heard that Kelly's life is not as sweet as I had imagined. Unsurprisingly, she cannot live in my house, nor does she have the capability or will to raise a child and work at the same time. In the end, Kelly returned to her parents' home, and her elderly parents are taking care of their grandchild. It seems that her parents are physically and mentally exhausted from taking care of her baby day and night, and from Kelly's increasingly selfish demands. I also heard that the significant reduction in their retirement funds due to expenses for home renovations casts a dark shadow over their hearts. The role that they once tried to impose on me for free is now something they themselves are shouldering. This is truly the meaning of retribution. Recently, I received a letter from my father through a lawyer. It contained words of apology and a request. Could we possibly meet and talk just once more? However, from the tone of the letter, I felt it was more of a selfish echo of wanting help with their current predicament than any sense of regret. I did not reply to him. I clearly understood that unless they genuinely confront their mistakes and learn to respect the lives of others, no healthy relationship could be built there. This is not a matter of whether to forgive them or not. It is a necessary choice to protect my own heart and life.